Anytime we push back on the government, anytime we make them back off a little bit from one of their authoritarian power grabs, it's very tempting to take a victory lap. It's very tempting to hang the mission accomplished banner, say we won the war, and then move on with our lives to other topics because we just won a great victory for our side and we need the adulation and the cheers and maybe a little bit of jeers from you guys out there in the audience. But the thing is, the battle is never over. The thing is, the Democrats never stop pressing forward on the issues that they care about, and they're just hoping to catch you off guard while you're celebrating your victory on a very similar issue. And of course, what I'm talking about is the latest censorship bureau to come from the Biden administration. However, this one is being headed up by Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, you might be thinking, Sean, we just beat the Nina Jankowicz Homeland Security Censorship Board, even though Homeland Security said that they're going to pause that board on disinformation. But no, you're wrong. Even though that one was defeated, even though Jankowicz was thrown out into the street where she belongs, she had to go cry on Chris Hayes' show. It turns out the government is coming right back at us. They're putting Kamala Harris out there to target your speech on the internet. And no, this is not exaggeration. This is not hyperbole. But this time it's under the guise of harassment. And of course, misinformation and disinformation, and of course, fighting racism. So we're going to get into this story. We're going to dive deep into Kamala Harris's board. We're going to talk about how she doesn't really even hide what she's doing and the game that she's playing, and how the White House statement announcing Kamala Harris's censorship board is even clearer that it is in fact a censorship board. But first, we got a sponsor for today's video, long-term sponsor of the channel. It's Keto with Justice. I'm going to toss it over to them, and then it's going to come back over here and we'll discuss what is going on. It is no secret that many people across this country are struggling with weight. However, it's not all your fault if you're one of these people. It's hard, and what makes it harder is that your metabolism actually slows down after age 20 by about 4% a year, meaning by the time that you're 50, you've lost 10% of your metabolism speed. One of the things to help kick that back into gear is this amazing powder with Keto Elevate. It's over at Keto with Justice, and I highly recommend it. This can help supplement a keto diet. It can help give you some of the effects of a keto diet, and it's an amazing price point at ketowithjustice.com. Get yours before it sells out. It has sold out before. ketowithjustice.com, my link, pinned comment, and in the top of the description. So America's favorite vice president, probably the most qualified and charismatic politician in American history, Kamala Harris, recently did a press conference about cyber harassment and its disproportionate effects on marginalized people. All these marginalized people are being harassed by people on the internet.com, and these people have now been upgraded from people who don't like when somebody speaks against them on the internet and can't deal with annoyances on the internet that everybody on the internet has to deal with, to survivors of online cyber violence and harassment.
Over half of the LGBTQ plus people in our country are survivors of severe harassment.
Now, let's roll into Kamala Harris, let's hear what she has to say, and maybe you'll be swayed by her.
Many of our laws have not caught up with the advances in technology. So as a United States Senator, I introduced legislation to make these acts a federal crime. And thanks to the recent, and our president, Joe Biden, and the recent reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, for the first time, cyber exploitation victims can sue their abusers in federal civil court. And this is progress.
So I'm not sure about the specifics of what Kamala Harris is talking about in this instance, but if she is actually talking about legitimate harassment that occurs over the internet, that's part of a pattern of harassment, and your ability to sue people for that in a way that you couldn't sue them before based on the fact that the harassment would have to be in person or would have to be phone calls and the laws weren't updated for the internet, then this is totally fine. Now, I'm not sure I believe her in this instance, but again, at least we're talking about a law passed by Congress that is targeting a very specific behavior. Now, Kamala sets it up in this way. She talks about actual harassment, which is an actual crime, in order to lead into her new function as vice president, the new job that she's going to take on and do halfway, if at all. Most of them she doesn't do at all, which of course is dealing with the online internet bullies that harass the minorities right here on the internet.com.
Yet, we still have so much more work to do to protect people from online harassment and abuse. which is why the work of this task force is so important. Context. Well, the internet is an essential part of life in the 21st century. Can't get around it. Can't get around without it.
Can't get around it. Can't get around without it.
And for far too many people, and Sloan told her story, the internet is a place of fear.
So again, you see the transition right there. We talked about something that had to do with the law. We talked about criminally prosecutable behavior that actually has to withstand constitutional muster. And then Kamala's like, the internet is also a place of fear. Where have we heard this before? From Anita Sarkeesian, from that other chick with the blue hair that testified at the UN, from all the advocates of online censorship. It appears that they are speaking through Kamala Harris right at this moment. And then she tries to throw some numbers at us, and I just want you guys to really think about what she's saying with these numbers.
1 in 3 women under the age of 35 report being sexually harassed online.
1 in 3 women under 35 report that they were sexually harassed on the internet.com. First and foremost, you had to really stretch that out. You had to really twist up those numbers in order to get a high 1 in 3 number for this problem to seem more dramatic. Second of all, if you are being sexually harassed online, if people are bothering you on the internet, there's a new function on the internet called a block function, a mute function if you're on Twitter, or a block function on Twitter, or this crazy function of not interacting with people that you don't like. The idea that 1 in 3 women are being sexually harassed and this should be treated in the same light as sexual harassment, like by your employer in the workplace, is ridiculous and absurd in every way. And the idea that people saying you're attractive or you're something or you're unattractive or whatever the rude comments, which by the way they definitely exist on the internet, has risen to the level that the White House has to deal with it, is also crazy. On top of that, don't forget, I did notice the fact that the White House had to disable comments for this video because they don't want you to be able to comment on how ridiculous Kamala Harris and this whole song and dance is. But it's about to get even worse because rather than reducing the pool of women in order to get a higher number so you could think it's a bigger threat, she's going to move even further to the more marginalized people, starting of course with the gays.
Over half of the LGBTQ plus people in our country are survivors of severe harassment.
Over half of the LGBT plus people in our country are survivors of severe harassment on the internet. That's right, of course, we gotta go to the gays, it's Pride Month, we gotta talk about their pain and suffering and the criticism that they have to deal with, and it turns out over half of these oversensitive people who complain about everything say that they're survivors of online comments that they didn't like.
Nearly 1 in 4 Asian Americans report being called an offensive name, usually motivated by racism.
1 in 4 Asian Americans report, and get ready for this because this might shock you, being called an offensive name while online. 1 in 4 Asian Americans have been called once in their life an offensive name on the internet. And usually, she doesn't have specific numbers on this, but I'm sure it's like 98%. That offensive name is motivated because they're mind reading the motivation behind the person by racism. Wow. Asian hate has taken new forms. Ignore all the crimes and the murders and who's doing those crimes and who's doing those murders. Ignore all of that. But let's just talk about the Asian hate online. 1 in 4 have been called a mean name.
Being called an offensive name online.
Now, I get called a bunch of mean names on the internet, but granted, I am far more of a public figure than most people on the internet.com. But when this happens, when people call me rude names, I don't get mad. I don't get angry. I don't get upset. I don't call social media companies. I don't call my congressman, my state representative, my senator. I don't contact the White House and demand that they put together a censorship board in order to address the mean things that are being sent about me. I handle it like an adult. I actually look up the IP address of the person who did it, find out their social security number, and open a series of credit cards in their name, steal their identity, and ruin their lives. And if I find out that they have children or anything like that, I will call them repeatedly and tell them that their children just got kicked out of school so that they rush down to the school. And then I take it one step further. I'll actually order a bunch of pizzas to their address and not pay for it. That's how high level I get when I go into these situations. Just kidding. Don't ever do that. I definitely don't do that. And this is not an endorsement of identity theft or any of the other things that are involved in this situation. It's just a joke. Everybody relax. I know you people out there that can't detect jokes.
And black people who have been harassed online in our country are 3 times more likely to be targeted, again, because of their race.
And black people that are online are 3 times more likely to be targeted because of their race. Now, to be clear, this doesn't surprise me. The fact that this data is out there on the internet, I don't find shocking, because what people do on the internet.com when they're trying to leave negative comments about you is they try to figure out what's the thing that bothers you, an easy go-to so that they can get under your skin. And for a lot of minorities, doing something or saying something racist as a way to get under their skin 100% works. This is why, disproportionately, I'm sure black people get comments about their skin. This is one of the reasons why when people are trying to attack a white person, they do the same thing, because they're trying to get that thing that bugs you. And for women, it's their appearance, which means sexual harassment, according to Kamala Harris. For ethnic minorities and for men, maybe the race, maybe the sexuality, whatever you can go for is what these people go for. But it's not about hating that person for those characteristics. It's about trying to shock and anger that person, because what these people are looking for ultimately is a reaction. And of course, we're getting a giant reaction by the White House trying to get involved.
All people deserve to use the internet free from fear. This task force, then, will tackle a threat that has been far too real for far too many people for far too long. And the recommendations of this group and the extended group of experts and those who have been advocates in this space for so long, the collective work will help modernize the federal government's response to violence against women and people of all genders.
Now, Kamala Harris, understandably, was incredibly vague throughout the course of this press conference, a lot of platitudes, a lot of nonsense, but you could tell by the data that she's using that what she's talking about is protected speech. You're allowed to attack people because they're women, you're allowed to attack people because they're black. All of that may be distasteful, you probably shouldn't do it, but all of that is protected under the First Amendment. So this is yet again another way of the government trying to go outside the bounds of their power in order to censor your speech. And if you don't believe it from Kamala Harris's press conference, if you don't believe it from the alleged data that she cited during the course of that press conference, you can actually look at the press release and read it for yourself. There actually is a quote on there about how they're trying to find the link between misogyny on the internet, radicalization, and then violence, thus meaning that they want to censor misogyny on the internet because they believe that's going to lead to violence in the future. On top of that, they're going to be providing recommendations for government agencies, local law enforcement, and for private companies on how to deal with this problem. And remember, these are recommendations coming from the federal government. When somebody points a gun at you and gives you a recommendation, typically you comply because you don't want to get shot. All of these government officials threaten to regulate the social media companies in ways that would hurt them unless they comply, because this is their end around of the First Amendment. And in fact, there are actually lawsuits pending against the federal government for them using their recommendations in order to get social media companies to censor information they didn't like on their behalf. So we already have instances of this happening. This is yet another mechanism of the Biden administration trying to control the legitimate parameters of debate under the guise of ending internet meanies and harassment. But again, it gets worse when you look into it even further. In a paragraph on the White House's statement announcing this board, they actually expand the group of people that should be protected from this internet meanies and harassment and people that disagree with them, and the list is a little more expansive than what Kamala Harris was talking about with the LGBTs and the minorities, etc. In totality, the list actually talks about how in the United States and around the world, women and LGBT plus people, political figures, public figures, activists, and journalists often face virulent sexualized online harassment and abuse, which can undermine human rights and full participation in democracy, governance, and civil life. Funny how in Kamala Harris's press conference, she only focused on the marginalized groups that we hear about a lot. She didn't talk about how this board is about protecting politicians from criticism and public figures. And by the way, public figure is a very broad category that I could arguably be included in. But more importantly, there is a public figure right now, at the moment that Kamala Harris announced this, that the media is raging about her treatment on the internet.com, and that of course is Amber Heard. So what this office under Kamala Harris could work at doing is contacting the social media companies and then recommending through the barrel of a gun, through the threat of regulation, that people kill off the legitimate criticism of this woman, Amber Heard, who's clearly being sexually harassed, according to Kamala Harris, based on the fact that she's a woman and she's marginalized by being a public figure.
My dog stepped on a bee.
My dad has to pee.
My mom's stuck in a tree.
My squirrel got bit by a flea.
Without my glasses, I cannot see.
My child spilled my tea.
I sharted on Santa's knee.
I want to learn Tai Chi.
You turned her against me!
Also, harassment, alleged harassment against politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez could be something that the White House could be targeting. Because remember, Ben Shapiro challenged her to a debate, and Ocasio-Cortez called that catcalling, aka a form of sexual harassment, which is not something that she saved exclusively for Ben Shapiro in that moment. This is a broad purpose board intended to censor the internet, and it's doing so based on the idea that words and violence are actually not two separate things. And in fact, if you allow free speech on the internet.com, if you allow alleged harassment, you're going to get mass casualty events like mass shootings, because we all know the reason why people are doing these crazy crimes has nothing to do with them and their own actions and them being individuals responsible for those actions, and has everything to do with the fact that Kamala Harris doesn't like the fact that people bring up that she got to her first position in politics by sleeping with Willie Brown, a political boss who was married in San Francisco. Because even though that's 100% true, and that's how she got not only her first, but her second job in politics, by sleeping with a political boss in San Francisco, me saying that apparently would qualify under Kamala Harris's own description as sexual harassment of a political public figure and an activist and a woman of color who is both black and Asian. So what are you gonna do? You can't harass Kamala Harris by telling the truth about Kamala Harris, because her censorship board is going to come after you, because the Biden administration is terrified of what will go on the internet when people are allowed to speak freely. This is an all-out assault on our First Amendment, plain and simple. And by the way, this isn't the first version of it. I talked about the Homeland Security version of it that is actually being paused at the moment, but Health and Human Services apparently has a version of it, and there's already a lawsuit pending against them for twisting the arms of social media to censor people who disagree with them. Remember, what Kamala Harris was talking about in terms of criminality was already covered in the newest authorization of the Violence Against Women's Act that extended the protections from harassment that only apply to phones or only apply to showing up to people's places to harassment that occurs over the internet. So we're already, by the very nature of the announcement of this board, past the legal definitions of harassment and into the colloquial definition of harassment, which is often just a code word for words and phrases that people in power like Kamala Harris do not like. We can't stand for it. We have to push back against it. We have to call it what it is. Yet another attempt of the Biden administration in an authoritarian manner to censor his political opposition. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like the video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about Kamala Harris's censorship board. Till next time.